Hi everyone, so this webinar is on micronutrients, which includes vitamins and minerals. So there are different types of vitamins. We have some that are organic compounds. They are vital to life and we do need them in minute amounts, which is why they're called micronutrients, but they don't provide any energy. Okay, which is why, so they don't actually have any kilojoules attached to them, but they are needed for bodily function. So there are two types of vitamins. We have fat-soluble and water-soluble vitamins. So fat-soluble vitamins are absorbed in the lymph system, which you may have heard about if you've done biology, but we will be going into that when we talk about digestion. And they travel in the blood in association with protein carriers as well, and are either stored in the liver or with other lipids in fatty tissue. However, you can get a buildup of fat-soluble vitamins, which can result in overconsumption, which can lead to death or at least a very severe health consequences in some cases as well. All right, so fat-soluble vitamins aren't really excreted by the body. Whereas water-soluble vitamins are your B group vitamins and vitamin C, and these are absorbed directly into the bloodstream. They travel freely, so they're not associated with any system, and they're not really stored. So any excess water-soluble vitamins tend to be excreted in the urine, and there's pretty much a low risk of having any sort of toxicity rather than fat-soluble vitamins. So when one of the Australian dietary guidelines that we'll be talking about later in the topic is that you should be consuming a colourful plate of food. And the reason for that is that different coloured foods have different vitamins in them. And if you're consuming different colours on your plate, you're more than likely getting all of your micronutrient requirements. So we'll start with fat-soluble vitamins. So vitamin A, its main function is usually to do with eyes. So it's to protect your eye from infection. It also has um, other functions in the respiratory, digestive, and excretory tracts. It also helps to protect the surface tissue on the skin and assist in night vision as well. If you have a lack of vitamin A, your development as a child may be slower. You might have cornea of the eye becoming dry and irritated, which could lead to blindness. You could also have night blindness as well as dry skin lesions. An excess of vitamin A will result in the excess being stored in the liver and can become toxic where you have a loss of appetite or you become nauseous, and your skin will also turn yellow as well. So there are a whole bunch of foods that are good sources of vitamin A, which are the ones that are looked here. So moving on to another fat-soluble vitamin, which is vitamin D, is usually vitamin D is there to help facilitate the absorption of calcium and phosphorus, and is there to help maintain healthy bones and teeth. So vitamin D, calcium, and phosphorus all have a very close relationship, and we'll talk more about that when we look at calcium and phosphorus. So some of the deficiencies of vitamin D include rickets, as well as disease, abnormal bone growth, um, and an excess of vitamin D can result in vomiting and diarrhea, as well as calcium deposits in the kidney and lungs, as well as kidney failure in excess cases, and some other sources of vitamin D. So sunlight actually promotes vitamin D synthesis in the skin. However, we can get vitamin D from fortified milk as well as salmon and shrimp. So the last fat-soluble vitamin that we're going to look at is vitamin E, which helps protect blood or red blood cells, also protects fats and vitamin A from being destroyed by oxidation, and does have a role to play in the digestive system as well. A lack of vitamin E can result in red blood cells that have a shorter lifespan, and as well as reducing protection to your digestive system. And excess of vitamin E can result in impaired blood clotting, which is part of the function that your red blood cells have, as well as muscle weakness and nausea. So some examples of vitamin E include sapphire oil, canola oil, mayonnaise, and sunflower seeds. So the last vitamin is vitamin K. And that has some good sources. So vitamin K's function is mainly involved in the process of blood clotting, and it actually controls 4 proteins that are needed for clotting. So if you have a deficiency in vitamin K, it's really quite hard to get a deficiency, and this is because vitamin K is actually produced by bacteria that live in the gut, which means that uh, you don't really need to worry too much about actually consuming it in your diet. So only really newborn babies can be affected by a lack of vitamin K because they don't actually have that bacteria yet. And as a result of lack of vitamin K or deficiency in vitamin K, you can result in excessive bleeding because your body is unable to clot normally like it would. There isn't really an excess of vitamin K either, and that's because the body is actually limited by the amount of vitamin K that it can store. Therefore, toxic accumulation can't really occur. And here are some examples of some foods that contain a lot of vitamin K. All right. So vitamin B, there's a whole bunch of B vitamins, and these are your water-soluble vitamins as well as vitamin C. So thiamine is a type of B vitamin, and it is really important for the metabolism of carbohydrates, and it also helps with the correct functioning of the nervous system. So a lack of thiamine will result in beriberi disease, which is the result. We've also got enlarged heart muscles as well, and also can have cramping in calf muscles. An excess of thiamine is just excreted in the urine, so there's no real symptoms of an excess because it is a water-soluble vitamin. And here's some examples of some foods that are rich in thiamine. So riboflavin is another B group vitamin, again water-soluble, and it helps with the metabolism of proteins and carbohydrates. So it also has a function for healthy skin and for eye health as well. A lack of riboflavin will result in disturbances in the digestive and nervous system. We won't be able to extract your energy from your proteins and your carbohydrates. You can also have symptoms including cracks around the corner of your mouth, as well as crusting on the lower lip and itching and burning of the eyes. And again, some examples of food. So beef liver is a really example of a food that's really high in riboflavin. So niacin is another B group vitamin that's water soluble and helps with the metabolism of carbohydrates. It's also important for healthy skin and for a healthy nervous system and digestive system. A deficiency in niacin will result in pellagra, which includes diarrhea, dermatitis, dementia, and death, the 4Ds. And an excess of niacin can result in an increased blood pressure as well as facial flushing. So some examples of really high foods that contain niacin include chicken breast and tuna. So folate is again another B group vitamin, is water soluble and is really important for the metabolism of proteins. So when we say metabolism, we mean the breakdown of those proteins to be able to access the energy and the amino acids for use in the body. They also produce red blood cells in association with cobalamin, which is vitamin B12. And a lack of folate can result in anemia, can result in sterility, and as well as neurological diseases and birth defects as well, which is why women who are pregnant should make sure they're getting enough folate. So an excess of folate will result in vomiting and diarrhea, and if undetected, deficiency of vitamin B12 can occur because you do have an association there. So asparagus is a food that's high in folate as well as beef liver and lentils. So B12, which is your cobalamin, is a coenzyme that's used for protein metabolism. It also helps with the formation of red blood cells in bone marrow, and it's also important for nerve tissue. So you can basically say that most of the B group vitamins are used for metabolism of your macronutrients, for digestive health, as well as nerve health as well. So a lack of B12 will result in anemia, abnormal skin pigmentation, and it can also increase your risk of getting folic acid deficiency as well. So here's just an example of anemic versus red blood cells. So your blood cell will often be larger than normal and irregularly shaped, and that's going to impact on its ability to transport oxygen around the body. And examples of foods that are high in B12 include sardines and chicken liver, as well as tuna. Okay, so moving on to the last water-soluble vitamin, which is vitamin C. It's really there to resist infection and promote wound healing. It's also really good for skin, gums, teeth, blood vessels, and bones. And it also actually helps to promote the absorption of iron and calcium. And that's interrelationship between some of the micronutrients. So a deficiency of vitamin C is scurvy, which you may have heard about as British sailors or pirates often suffered from scurvy as a result of vitamin C deficiency because all they really had on board was salted meat and water, which isn't very nutritious. So they did actually used to give lime juice to British sailors to avoid scurvy. So an excess of vitamin C can result in nausea, stomach cramps, and diarrhea. Can also result in kidney and bladder stones, and vitamin B12 deficiency may also occur. So examples of foods that have high vitamin C include green peppers, orange juice, strawberries. Now, when it comes to excess vitamin C, you have to be consuming a lot more than is recommended because it is a water-soluble vitamin. So if you are munching down on vitamin C lollies, which are actually supplements, then you might actually give yourself some of these issues. But it's pretty hard to have an excess of vitamin C and of any water-soluble vitamins. So here's just another few more good sources of vitamins that you can have a look at. I'm just going to quickly skip through these. Okay, so one of the controversies that's on at the moment, I'm sure you would have seen Swiss and supplements and all those other brands, is vitamin supplements. So a lot of people in the US actually take vitamin supplements, but do they actually help at all? So the experts are saying that healthy people might benefit from a multivitamin supplement taken every day or two, but there could be a risk that you could be overdosing. So some people that may need supplements are people that have nutrient deficiencies. Women that are lactating or pregnant will need supplements as well. Newborns and infants will also need supplements. And those that are lactose intolerant, which we're going to talk about next week, will also need to get their calcium from somewhere else. If you have a really poor or restricted diet or you have a lot of allergies, then you might also need to take supplements as well. So some of the invalid reasons for taking supplements include that soils actually lack nutrients because you can't grow foods properly unless they have all the nutrients. Or if you feel tired and you think that the supplements are actually going to provide you with energy, it's not actually that simple. Or that you think that your supplements might help you to cope with stress. Or you think they might actually prevent or cure an illness. All right, so moving on to minerals, which is the second half of micronutrients. We have several minerals that we're going to talk about, and they do have processes that are required in the body in helping our body to function properly. So some of the main ones are your calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium, and then other ones that help also include potassium, magnesium, sodium, and chloride. So some of the other minerals have major parts to play. So if we have a look at calcium, it's needed for strong bones and teeth, helps with normal blood clotting as well, and helps with the contraction of and relaxation of muscles. So good food sources of calcium include milk and milk products, as well as tofu. If you're lactose intolerant, almonds and dark green vegetables are good non-lactose sources of calcium. So in terms of peak bone mass, it's really important that when you are young, you are consuming enough calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D, because calcium and phosphorus promote the absorption of one another, and vitamin D also promotes absorption of calcium and phosphorus too. And they're all needed for good bone growth. So when you are growing, you need to build up crucial bone mass, and you have a peak bone mass at the age of 25. Then you start to see an acceleration of a decrease in bone mass when women hit menopause, and then a gradual loss as you become elderly. So men don't have that same drop that women do because they don't hit menopause, obviously, but they do see a decline as you get older with age. So calcium needs to be absorbed by the diet. And what you need to make sure is if you're consuming calcium, that you're consuming it with the right macro or micronutrients. So if you're consuming a lot of protein, sodium, or caffeine with your calcium, then it's not actually going to be absorbed as better or as well as it could be if you didn't have protein, sodium, or caffeine consumed at the same time. Because what actually happens is the calcium is not absorbed by the intestine and it's actually lost, as in through urine, feces, or perspiration. So if you don't have sufficient calcium obtained in the diet, what your body will actually do is take calcium from your bones, and this a long-term calcium deficiency will result in osteoporosis, which is a bone deficient or calcium deficiency disease. Another calcium deficiency disease is Rickets, which is usually due to a lack of vitamin D and as association decreased absorption of phosphorus and calcium, which then results in affected growth of the legs. So here's the calcium requirements. I'm not going to go through them. You can have a look at that yourself. All right, so the next mineral that we're going to look at is iron. It has a really important part because it forms hemoglobin, which carries oxygen around the body. So it's very, very important. And it's also an essential component for some enzymes that are involved in oxidation and the utilization of energy in cells. So very, very important. So what happens is if you've got foods that are high in vitamin C, the absorption rate of iron increases. So if you have spinach and something that's got high vitamin C, like pumpkin, for example, if you consume those two together, then they will promote the absorption of one another. And meat and fish will also increase the absorption of iron from non-heme iron sources. So there are actually two types of iron. There's heme iron and non-heme iron. So heme iron comes from animal products and animal byproducts, so meat, dairy, cheese, and heme iron is iron that comes from plant sources. So heme iron is the iron that is used to form red blood cells and can only be taken from animal products, whereas non-heme iron is used for other purposes and is only sourced from plants. So soy, calcium, and phosphorus actually reduce the absorption of non-heme iron, as well as tea, coffee, and wine reduce the absorption of heme iron, as well as the binding of iron and its purpose in the body. Fiber also reduces iron absorption if consumed in large amounts too. So you have to think about how you're consuming your iron to make sure that it is being absorbed. So iron deficiency is actually one of the most common nutrient deficiencies in the world, and it causes a decreased production in red blood cells that results in iron deficiency and anemia, where you have chronic tiredness, irritability, and the reduced capacity to be able to exercise. So vegetarians athletes that have high impacts, especially high impact sports, and people that only eat small amounts of foods are especially at risk. So it's really important that if you are a vegetarian, that you are looking at where are you getting your heme iron sources from. And if you're a vegan, you're at even more risk of getting iron deficiency as well. Women and females in particular are at even higher risk of getting iron deficiency because of menstruation. So they should all, if you are vegetarian or vegan, you should be taking iron supplements because you are not getting enough iron in your diet. So one of the other minerals that we're looking at is sodium. Does help with the exchange of fluid and the regulation of fluid in all of your cells, which is really important to keep you hydrated, and also helps with muscle contraction and relaxation. So salt is usually added in the process of cooking, but causes of high or excess sodium include high blood pressure, fluid retention, and kidney and heart failure, and it can also reduce the absorption of calcium as well. A deficiency of sodium can result in muscle cramps, vomiting, and apathy. But it's not very common in Australia because if we have any sort of physical activity where we are losing, that can result in a short-term deficiency, but we can usually consume enough sodium to then put our levels back up. So a high blood pressure is just the blood pressure that's the measurement of force applied to the artery walls. So most Australians exceed their sodium requirements by at least double what is recommended daily. So another mineral is potassium. Again, helping the movement of fluid in and out of cells, helps with muscle contraction. So potassium and sodium are usually linked together. So good food sources include soybeans, bananas, most fruits and vegetables. So a deficiency in potassium can result in muscle cramps and weakness, dehydration, as well as prolonged vomiting and diarrhea will cause an excess loss of potassium and that needs. So that's why you would have heard about electrolyte drinks like Gatorade or Powerade. They actually have electrolytes like potassium and sodium that help to replenish your stores so that you don't get cramping. So it's rare to get a excess potassium because it is just excreted through the body either as urine or as sweat. And the last one that we're going to look at is iodine. So that's needed for thyroid hormones produced by the thyroid gland, and it helps to regulate your metabolic rate as well as your growth. A deficiency is called a goiter, where you've got an enlarged thyroid gland and you've also got weight gain. An excess of iodine can cause your thyroid to enlarge and can also damage the fetus if you're pregnant. And the last one is zinc. So this is used for immune system function as well as the metabolism of carbohydrates and proteins, and is also used for the production of DNA, RNA, and hemoglobin. And most animal sources, any animal products are usually high in zinc, and plant sources of zinc tend to be less readily absorbed than animal sources. So a zinc excess will result in lethargy as well as nausea and vomiting, and a deficiency will result in some neuro disorders as well as skin lesions and potentially infertility.